the presentation. All right, low-key lighting. So you might think of like the down low when we think low-key, meaning there's very little, and that's what we're going to be talking about, is using a little bit of light to take creative and interesting pictures. So this is a good definition. Low-key refers to a style of photography that utilizes predominantly dark tones to create a dramatic-looking image, meaning we're going to really push the darkness in our pictures to make them look more impactful and dramatic. The opposite is true of high-key lighting, which seeks to overlight the subject so that there's no shadows, almost zero shadows in the image. They're very bright. Both are usually done in studios, although they don't have to be. Low-key lighting usually uses a black backdrop to help darken the photo, where high-key lighting usually uses a white backdrop to do the opposite effect, to really light up the subject. Neither are necessary. You can get high-key lighting or low-key lighting without the backdrops completely out of studio, but you'll see if you do examples of the pictures that we're going to look at in a little while, you'll see a lot of those are using backdrops. The main thing you're going to want to write down or know for this project is the low-key definition. So let's start, just get that to start with. All right, so the trick to low-key, how do we make it work when we take the pictures? We definitely want shadow, which means we're going to use very, very little bit of light, almost no light. In fact, most of the time we use just a single hard light. Now, those are two other terms. We have low-key lighting and high-key lighting. High-key lighting uses soft light to get rid of shadows, and low-key lighting uses hard light to create shadows, meaning you use one single light source. Sometimes you'll use a single light source and a reflector if there's an area you want to get a little bit more light in or brighten a section. And you are going to lose elements of the subject in shadow, and that's what you're going for. The trick here is learning how to manipulate the light. Where do you put the light? Where does it go? Where do you stand in relation to the light? And that is trial and error. A big part of photography is taking lots of pictures and moving around, not standing in one spot and hitting the button 20 times. That's going to look pretty much the same every time. Moving your position, lowering your angle, moving the light farther away from the subject will lessen its intensity, but increase its spread, meaning that it'll be a larger area of light. So it might light up the background when you don't want that. It's trial and error. There's no definite right answer for this situation. It factors in things like if they're wearing shiny clothes, for example. They're wearing something that has a lot of like screen printing that has a gloss to it. It's going to reflect the light, and it's going to create it bright areas that you may not want. So it's trial and error. You take your picture and you move forward. Let's take a look at some examples. This is a great example of low-key light. Notice half of his face is visually not there anymore, right? The shadow is completely devouring that side of the picture, meaning if we're to look at this and we reverse engineer it, what side do you think the light is on? Is the side on his left side or on his right side? It would be his right, your left. And do you think the light is coming straight or down at an angle or up at an angle, given what we see here? It looks straight, right? So this is what we call reverse engineering. We're looking at the final product and we're figuring out how do they do it? How do they achieve that? Now, to get this little bit of light, you're going to need a slow shutter speed. And you're going to want a fairly open aperture. So the shutter might be 1/30, maybe 1/4. It varies. You have to, again, try it, see what your exposure is going to look like. If it's open too long, you might get too much light, and then you lose that dark background that you're going for. Notice not just the main part of his face here being shadowed, but you also have this part around his eye that's lost in shadow. The part inside the jacket is lost in shadow. So it's dramatic. It looks intense. It almost looks intimidating, right? Like he's ready to jump out of an alley and beat you up. And then Batman's there to save you. Can't go wrong with Batman. Now notice the gloss on the mask, how it reflects the light, and so it gives some brightness there that isn't otherwise there. This is a blurred picture because I increased the size a little too much, but the sculpting of the mask really adds those hard lines and increases the opportunity for shadow. You have shadow over here on the side, that is created by this eyebrow being raised, something you wouldn't have with just a normal face. Another reason to use something like this is it does adds dimension, it adds dynamic. Now, this is the first image where we're almost losing our subject completely, and we have more or less a glow around the outer edge. Our light is up and behind the subject instead of even at the side of them. And so while we can still see parts of his face because the light is spilling over, it's predominantly giving us like a halo effect around the edges of the dog. And what a well-behaved subject that dog was. Good boy. Now, here's the violin. And you can see we have a really interesting angle. A nice circular light filling this area, and we kind of lose who's playing it. It's a floating neck of an instrument. It's very compelling. It's an interesting shot. Again, it's a little pixelated because of the increase in the size, but overall, it's a really interesting photo. It's a really cool way to look at something. And that, again, this is created using probably a flashlight or something directly on the hand. Very controlled light, so there's no spill. We don't have anything going to the object or the person behind them. Does anyone know what we call this? When you see a person just as the outline, a silhouette. It is called a silhouette. And this is achieved by putting the light source directly behind the subject so that the camera and the light source are in line with each other with the subject blocking it out. It's like an eclipse. When a solar eclipse happens or a lunar eclipse, the sun and the moon block each other out. The effect is really cool. It's not always easy to achieve. You notice we lose parts of her arm here, and over her whole right side of her arm here is completely gone. But it's a cool effect. Sometimes it can be put to a lit background and just the subject being a complete shadow. But it's a really good example of a hard light being used effectively. What's different about this picture? It's in color. All the other photos have been turned black and white to add to the dramatic element. This one was kept in color. You don't have to make them black and white. It's a choice that you have. You can totally make them black and white, but leaving it in color sometimes looks really cool. It adds again to the effect of what's visible. Note the rule of thirds being very much followed in this picture too. And what's different about this one, aside from the fact that it's a car? I don't think they're on. I think that's reflecting light. But the difference is we're not in a studio. This one is outside. We can see the brick wall. If we go back through all those other pictures, it's just a black background. This one we can see the wall. We can see the details in the areas where there's light on the wall at least. And that way you know we're outside. We can see the ground. This whole area is lit, right? But only these areas are lost in shadow, including part of the car. You can take these outside if it's dark. Now, we can't take it outside, but what I want you to take from this is we don't have to have a solid black background. You can see things behind the subject, and it still be a low-key lighting scenario. So we're going to have multiple people working in the same space, because we can turn the lights out in here, we can turn the lights out in the studio, but there's going to be several people taking pictures, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the process today, but there's going to be some spillover from different light sources, and so this is going to happen where you're going to see the background, and that's still okay. The main requirement here is using one light source to create visually dynamic images. And here is the project. You're going to be taking several pictures of 5 different subjects. Several, and I mean it. You're going to need to move around, try things out, change the lighting, change the settings on the camera so that you get a better exposure. And you kind of can't trust the exposure meter on this one. It's going to probably tell you it's too dark because the entire room will be dark, but your subject might still be visible, and that's what you have to try and see. So you can't just trust the exposure meter. Sometimes it'll get it right, but other times it won't. You're going to take all those pictures, and then using Adobe Bridge, you're going to select the best picture that you took of each subject and a runner-up for each subject. So a total of 10 pictures. So 5 subjects, and for each subject, your best picture of them, and the picture you could, you think is your second best, basically. You should be editing for lighting and contrast, brightness and contrast. You can darken the picture and push the contrast to really bring out the black in the shadows. And you can also feel free to turn it black and white if you choose to, or keep it full color. You can do color isolation with this, like if someone's blue eye is really shining, you can keep their eye blue, or if their blue shirt is really powerful color-wise, you want to leave that blue, but black and white everything else, that can be done. I would recommend using the raw setting so that you have more control over the exposure in post. But, yep, you're going to be submitting in 10 pictures. So the least amount of pictures I think I've had you turn in so far.